Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today grew up in Oregon, but now lives in Spokane, Washington. He has always loved history and political science, but didn't think he could make a living in those fields, so he chose writing in the software development business and has for 35 years. He is now an American author of historical fiction, currently writing the Road to the Breaking series, an epic adventure that starts just before the Civil War and carries on to its conclusion. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Chris A. Bennett.
Thank you, Julia. It's good to be here.
Chris, our first question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, as a lot of people in my position, I'm sure, life intervened. When I always liked writing. I was actually the high school newspaper editor, did a lot of writing in high school. In college, I took several creative writing classes and journalism classes, thinking that, I might want to be a professional writer as my career. And, but, friends and family, they tend to discourage anything that, is not mainstream and isn't necessarily going to make you the best living. And so I looked at other careers and ended up in the software development business. It seemed kind of interesting, and I have I think a good logical mind, so it was a good fit for me. But I always had this itch to write and to write something creative. But with with life intervening, as I said, you have kids and a wife and a mortgage and then a divorce, and life goes on, and years go by, and at some point you realize that you don't have unlimited time. You got to get with it. I'm sure you've went through something similar like that, and the thought at that point of with everything else going on in life, the thought of being able to write a novel, it just seemed overwhelming. Like, how would I ever have the time to do that? And then one day it sort of occurred to me that, well, in my regular day job, my software development job, I write software designs that are hundreds of pages, highly technical stuff, and I don't think anything of it. I remember back in college, if we had to do a 10-page double-spaced term paper, that was like monumental. That was a lot of work.
Torture.
Yeah. And so the thought of writing a novel was just kind of overwhelming until I realized I'm already writing novel-length documents. So I decided, what, if I'm doing that for, just for work, I should be able to do the same for pleasure. So that sort of was what kick-started me to get going on it.
Well, after deciding to write your first book, you've been quite prolific ever since. You now have 6 books in your series.
I do.
For those of us who are on a much slower path, please share how you accomplished such speed in writing and publishing.
Well, it's a little misleading because to get the first one out, it took me about 5 years from when I started the research, and it was not just researching the history, because I had a background in history and I knew that pretty well, but there's a lot of detail that you don't necessarily know when you have the big picture. So there's a lot of research, but then also a lot of my research was how to write a novel, because I'd never done it before. All the writing I'd been doing was technical writing. I'd read a lot of novels, obviously, so I knew what a good one sounded like, but there's definitely not just an art to writing, but there's also there's a science to it. There's a structure that you need to follow. There's techniques and methods that you need to learn. So I spent a lot of time doing that kind of research, the how to write kind of research. So I really, once I started really working with professional, people in the industry, I already written the first 4 books. They just needed to be, reformatted, re-edited, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not quite as fast as it sounds like I am, but it was a pretty good effort to get those out in that time period, for sure.
Well, I think you are that fast, because if you can write enough that 2 books out of 1, you've still written all of those hundreds of thousands of words. So you are a pretty fast writer. You were talking about research. Have you made pilgrimages out of the Northwest to the battlegrounds of the Civil War and other historic sites?
Well, I really wanted to. That was the plan. I had started writing the book and was well into it and wanted to go. It starts in West Texas. It basically goes all the way across the country back to Virginia. And my plan was to fly to Texas, to get, to drive out to Fort Davis, Texas, out in the West Texas wilderness, and basically rent a car and drive that route that my men take in the book. And then COVID hit, so that didn't happen. So I have yet to do that, to visit all those sites that I've written about, but that's definitely in the plan to do that. And hopefully soon we'll be able to do that.
I grew up in Mississippi, so I'm well aware of the battlegrounds of the Civil War and all up through the Southeast. And so you'll need to do that. It's quite fascinating.
Oh, I would love to. I mean, because all the research and learning about those battlefields and seeing it in my mind, but not having been there, it's definitely something I want to be able to do.
How are each of your books in the series divided? Are they divided by specific battles or years, or how did you choose to divide the series?
So they're very chronological, and so the first one starts in spring of the year 1860. So it's pre-Civil War. And my main characters basically have no inclination that the Civil War is even brewing, because they're out in West Texas fighting Indians and outlaws and don't really have a clue what's going on back east. And so, and then from there, it basically follows the timeline of the secession and then the Civil War, first the election of Lincoln and the secession of the Civil War. So it's generally just in chronological order. Right now, it's working out to be approximately a 6-month time period per book. So it's not necessarily focused on a particular battle, but more just what was going on during that time frame, and sort of weaving my characters into the actual events that took place.
Did you choose a traditional path to publishing your books or another?
So the funny thing is, when I started writing, I really didn't think much about publishing at all. I was just focused on, can I write a book, and then as I got farther into it, I started thinking about, okay, now what? I've written all these pages, and all the research that I did was that, traditional publishing, your odds of breaking into that are pretty low. I mean, it's realistically very, very difficult, unless you know somebody, unless you have some connections, etc. It's very difficult. But the good news is, with Amazon and Kindle and all the things in recent years, self-publishing, as opposed to in the old days when it was self-publishing meant pay somebody to print a bunch of copies of your book, store them in your garage, and walk door to door and try to get people to buy them. And people kind of look down their nose at anybody that tried to do that because it was kind of a waste of time and money. But now it's a whole different matter. And actually, I hooked up with a couple of websites, one by an Englishman that promotes the idea of self-publishing, and he actually teaches courses in how to do it. And he personally has done it to the point of he's making $1 million or more a year on Amazon, just self-published. So that was kind of inspirational. Started going that route, doing all the self-help kind of courses online. And that was very helpful. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of extra money to put into the book because we were trying to put everything into our software business, and so I was trying to basically do it on a shoestring. But at some point, I realized that you kind of hit a wall there, and that you can only go so far because then you get spread too thin. If you're doing all that publishing kind of stuff, then you're not writing. And that was the part of it that I really wanted to do. So it's just by sort of chance or whatever, because of all this research I've been doing, I got an email from Amy Collins of New Shelves Books, inviting me to a seminar in Manhattan, the 6th of December, 2019. And asked my wife, hey, would you be interested in going to Manhattan in December? Well, yeah, of course. Your whole life growing up, at least out here on the West Coast, you see stories of, New York at Christmas time, and Manhattan in particular. So it's sort of a magical thing. And so we did that. It was a great trip, had a lot of fun, met Amy, really clicked with her, made a good connection there. Went away from that just totally convinced that was what I needed to do, was to work with her, to let some people that knew what they were doing take it over and take it on. And that led to working with Carrie Barnum, who's been just fantastic to work with and helped me immensely, got me hooked up with a professional editor, a professional proofreader, both of which I thought I didn't need until I had them. And then I realized, yes, I did need them. And it makes just all the difference in the world. If you think that you can edit your own writing, you're wrong. No matter how smart you are, you can't see it. You get too close to it. You need a fresh set of eyes to say, this doesn't work, or this, what about this idea? And I think what I tell people, it makes it go from a good book to a great book. And that's the difference. So.
Well, I think you hooked up with the right two. Carrie and Amy are both dynamic women, and they know exactly how to guide us on our publishing path. So you lucked into the right two.
Absolutely. Yeah, just pure dumb luck. But yeah, I feel really fortunate. They've been fantastic to work with, for sure.
What about your writing routine? Are you a morning or a night person? How do you squeeze in your writing?
It's been mostly night. At the beginning, especially, I have my morning routines usually exercise, and then I had my day job that would go basically a 9 to 5 type thing, and then so then in the evenings I would write, and sometimes until all hours of the night. At first my wife was pretty skeptical of the whole thing, like, oh, you've got a full-time job, why do you need to do this? And it's like, I need to do this because I need to do this. And I think once she saw me, staying up till 2, 3 in the morning writing, she get, okay, this is real. He's really serious. He's going to do this. And then as a couple of years went by, I worked my way into getting Fridays off to work on the book. So on Fridays, I pretty much work 9 to 5 on book writing, and some of the other stuff that goes with it. Like I'll have a web meeting with Carrie during those days. But so now I think, and I think you recently retired, I understand, and they're now pretty much doing the writing full time, which is awesome. I'm trying to do that. My wife and I actually, well, she's the boss, but we have a software business. And so I'm trying. I joke with people. I'm trying to get my boss to fire me, but I haven't been able to get her to do that yet. But we're getting to the point where I think that this year, shortly, I'll be able to quit mostly doing my day job and switch to mostly doing writing. So I guess the long answer to your short question is I think it's going to be pretty much a 9 to 5 kind of a thing eventually. Right now, it's just sort of whenever I can find the time. So all hours of the day or night.
I've read something that says that baby boomers do not have any inclination that they will ever stop working. So I think even if you have a day job or whether you take on your writing as your day job, we're still going to never give up our work. We just really value work and want to continue that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The thought of, well, retire, typical retirement and just, kick back and play golf, and that just doesn't appeal to me at all. I don't have any interest in doing that. It's like, well, why would I want to do that? That just sounds very boring. Yes. I want to be doing something productive and useful and enjoyable, and so the writing is for me the perfect way to do it. It doesn't feel like retiring. It just feels like, a new career.
Yes, I say that I think writing is like swimming. I think we can do it the rest of our lives, because I've had some people who are 80 and 90 who are going to be on Authors Over 50, and they're still writing beautiful work. So we have a lot to still offer. Well, why don't you choose one of your books or a story and give us a brief synopsis, set it up for us, and then read a passage so that we can hear your tone.
Okay, so so the original story, book one, starts out in West Texas, as I said, Fort Davis, Texas, pre-Civil War. The fort held about 400 soldiers, and their task was guarding the frontier from Indians and outlaws. And my main character, Nathaniel Chambers, is a war hero from the Mexican War, and is now the commander in charge of Fort Davis, Texas, when the story begins. And then we got about 6 books into the series, and again, Carrie recommended that I write a short story that's a prequel. And so she didn't give me any specific, suggestion of what it should be, but it, something that ties to the series, but is not a direct line of the current plot line. And I thought about it, and I decided to write this little prequel. And basically the prequel is about how Captain Chambers first arrived at Fort Davis, Texas, and he's kind of getting introduced to his men. And this particular scene that I want to read is they're out after he's basically changed the whole routine and the way that they train and equip themselves, and he's basically retrained them to fight. And so this particular scene is they're out in the wilderness, and they're fighting against the Comanche Indians. So I'll switch over to reading off the other screen here. The soldiers' attack was too overpowering for the Comanches, so they abandoned the woods and quickly fell back, leaving behind 4 dead. The army soldiers had been fortunate thus far, only a half dozen wounded and none that appeared to be mortal. The Comanches had retreated up a barren rise that had a peak of tall rocks. From there, they fired down upon the soldiers, who'd drawn up at the edge of the wooded area below. The soldiers returned fire in a steady barrage that prevented the Comanche from being able to target any individuals. But after a brief pause in the gunfire from above, the soldiers saw a white cloth raised up from behind a large rock, waving back and forth on a long stick. "Cease firing," Captain Chambers called out, and a sudden silence fell over the battlefield. After only a few moments, an older, burly-looking Indian stepped forward from behind the rock and stood still with his right hand raised in sign of parley. Captain Chambers stood to step out, but he felt something tugging on his sleeve, holding him back. He turned and saw it was Sergeant Tom Clark, with a concerned look on his face. Tom said, "You shouldn't go, sir. It's too dangerous. Someone else should go." But the captain said, "Who would that be, Mr. Clark? Is there someone here whose life is more expendable than mine?" Tom had no answer to this question, so Nathan Chambers turned and walked alone up the hill toward the Comanche leader. Nathan stepped up to the Indian and raised his hand in greeting. "I am called Crouching Lion in your tongue," the Comanche said. Nathan nodded, then answered, "Then we share a name, Crouching Lion. I am called Señor Leon down in Mexico, which means Mr. Lion in your tongue." Crouching Lion nodded, but said nothing, so Nathan decided to initiate the conversation. "Will we have peace, Crouching Lion, or is today a good day to die?" The Comanche seemed to contemplate this question for a moment before answering. "There can be only peace if the great chief of the Bluecoats keeps his word. Otherwise, yes, it is a good day to die, Mr. Lion." Nathan could only respond to this with a puzzled look, as he had no idea what the Indian had meant by the chief of the Bluecoats' word. But in a moment, Crouching Lion reached inside his fringed leather vest, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and handed it across to Nathan. Nathan unfolded it and quickly read, "This is an agreement, a treaty, signed by General Twiggs, commander of the U.S. Army Department of Texas. It says here the Comanche will not raid to the morning side of Old's Creek." I believe that is the creek we soldiers forded a quarter mile back to the east. Then it goes on to say, "In return, no white settlers will be allowed to homestead, mine, or otherwise occupy the valley on the setting sun side of Old's Creek, which is permanently set aside for Comanche hunting grounds." Nathan handed the paper back to Crouching Lion and said, "I am newly arrived at the Bluecoat Fort, and this is the first I've heard of this treaty or seen of it. I will honor the Bluecoat chief's word and make the white settlers leave this valley, if you will pull your men back to, say, to that next ridge over there until after the settlers are gone." Crouching Lion glanced to where the captain was pointing and seemed to ponder this for a moment. Finally, he nodded. "It will be done," he said. Captain Chambers reached into his pocket, pulled out a cigar, and lit it. He took a few puffs, then offered the cigar to Crouching Lion, who gazed at it a moment, then took it and inhaled deeply before slowly letting the smoke out again. Then Captain Chambers said, "I will never apologize for doing my duty, but I am sorry you lost men this day." The Comanche looked at him a moment, took another puff on the cigar, and said, "They died as warriors. For men like you and me, it is the proper way to die." Nathan nodded. "I would die with my weapons in hand and a curse for my enemy on my lips." The Indian returned the nod and said, "It is good," handing the cigar back to Nathan. The captain wasn't sure if the Comanche was referring to the cigar or his statement about death, so he just said, "Keep it. It is for you, a symbol of my promise to keep the Bluecoat chief's word." Crouching Lion nodded and repeated, "It is good," then turned and walked back to where his warriors waited behind the rocks. That's one of the scenes in the short story.
Very interesting. Where I live in Texas, Fredericksburg, Texas, there was a treaty here between the Comanche and the Germans who settled here, and it was never broken. And our town is celebrating its 175th anniversary this year, and the Comanche will be here to celebrate that treaty as well.
That's awesome. It's fantastic.
Chris, do you only read historical fiction? Do you have time to read any books for pleasure?
Actually, my favorite all time was Lord of the Rings. That was kind of my original inspiration. But yeah, right now I don't have a lot of time to read pleasurable books. I read a lot of research books, a lot of nonfiction books. As far as fictional books, when I was first starting my series, I really enjoyed the Shahara books, Michael Shahara and Jeff Shahara. I don't know if you're familiar with those. it's kind of a neat story. Michael Shora, who's the father, he wrote a lot of different types of books when he was writing. He's passed away now, but a lot of different genres. He was a prolific author that liked to try lots of different things. But one book in particular that he wrote was about the Battle of Gettysburg. And it was technically historical fiction, but the unique part about it at the time that nobody else was really doing was he did very meticulous research to the point where he knew every detail of the battle and he described it in great detail, but he wrote it as a novel. So it was as if you were there and you could hear what General Lee said to General Longstreet, and and what Pickett said when he started his charge, and what they had for breakfast, and when they sneezed, and it was very much in a novel form. So historical accuracy to a great detail, but then immersive novelized form, which was very unique and very fascinating. And it's a great way to learn history. And then years later, his son Jeff started writing, and his whole life he had people say, of all the books your dad wrote, this one about Gettysburg it's called The Killer Angels, and it's the best thing he did, and it's really great. And so, for whatever reasons of his own, he decided to take up the challenge, and he started writing those same kinds of books. And he actually wrote the prequel to the Gettysburg story of his father. So the son wrote the prequel called Gods and Generals, which ended up being made into a movie. So, and then he's written dozens of books since, a lot of Civil War books. He wrote books back into the Mexican War. So when I first started writing, I read pretty much all his books to kind of to bone up on my Civil War history, but also they were just a lot of fun and pleasure to read.
I think every time we read an author that we really enjoy, we receive so much from it, to know of those specific details and to be able to incorporate those into our own writing, and see somebody else who does them well. It's a learning about craft, which we can take classes for, or we can do a lot of reading, and or maybe both.
Yeah, it definitely influences you even when you're not thinking about it. I heard an author once give advice of, read everything you possibly can as a writer, read everything you can, and then try to forget it all when you write, because you don't want to plagiarize, but it definitely it sinks into you. And, like I said, I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and my proofreader, Travis Tynan, is also a Lord of the Rings fan, which is kind of neat because we have that connection. Mm-hmm. But I don't think consciously about anything from Lord of the Rings when I'm writing. I'm not setting out to say, well, I'm going to make this like what Frodo did or what Bilbo did or whatever. I just, write what's in me to write and what I think of to write. And sometimes he'll give me feedback that says, oh, this is very much sort of the tone and the way some of the characters act in a heroic manner. Just so that obviously has sunk into me, and so it's worked its way into my writing subconsciously.
I think every time I listen to an audiobook, and that's how I read these days, is I only have time for audiobooks, but it won't even be about the subject that I'm writing about, but it'll trigger a childhood memory or, something out of the blue that I'll have to get back home and write down, because that idea would have come to me while I was listening to somebody else's work.
Yep. That happens a lot of times.
Chris, do you have any advice for writers, authors over the age of 50?
My advice would be, don't wait till you retire. Do it now. It's amazing, like I said, how I wrote basically 4 books in my spare time, 10 minutes here, an hour here, hour there. It's amazing how quickly that can add up to 500 pages. So just, don't wait till you have time. Just make time and just do it. I mean, you're not getting any younger. You just, start doing it. Don't wait. That's my advice.
Well, that's great advice. And I think that's a wonderful place to close our chat today. And We appreciate you so much joining us, and we're very excited to count you among our authors over 50.
Thank you so much, Julie. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.